The hypocrisy is unbelievable. Mega Republicans who took hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars in pandemic relief loans, had their loans forgiven, are trying to block this relief. Marjorie Taylor Greene, that great American, she and her husband received $183,000 in debt relief, cash to pay for their business. And then there's another. She said it's completely unfair to forgive student loans for working middle-class families. Come on, man.
Biden finally taking it to these extremist Republicans is long overdue, but definitely welcome. There is no reason why the lunatics in government like the Marjorie Taylor Greenes out there should always be the ones to get the final word. Here Biden's calling out Greene for being part of the Republican-led contingent, railing against his move to forgive between $10,000 and $20,000 in student loan debt for those making under $125,000 a year. All the while, you've got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene who personally received PPP loans that were then forgiven. Marjorie Taylor Greene had come out and said this.
But for our government just to say, okay, well, your debt is completely forgiven. Obviously, they have an agenda for that. They need votes in November. So the timing is a pure coincidence there as well. But it's completely unfair. And taxpayers all over the country, taxpayers that never took out a student loan, taxpayers that pay their bills and maybe even never went to college or just hardworking people, they shouldn't have to pay off the great big student loan debt for some college student that piled up massive debt going to some Ivy League school. That's not fair.
And like Biden said, Marjorie Taylor Greene had $183,504 in PPP loans forgiven. So when she clutches her pearls over the government saying, okay, your debt is completely forgiven, the government literally saw her debt and said, okay, your debt is completely forgiven. And it wasn't just Marjorie Taylor Greene. Vern Buchanan benefited from $2.3 million in forgiven PPP loans. A Republican named Markwayne Mullin whined on Twitter about paying student debt. He had over $1.4 million in PPP loans forgiven. It happened to Republicans Kevin Hern, who had $1 million forgiven, Mike Kelly, who had $987,000 forgiven, and even Matt Gaetz, who had $482,000 forgiven. Because apparently, letting taxpayers forgive hundreds of thousands, if not millions of debt is fine, but $10,000 for those struggling to get by, we couldn't possibly allow that. What's worse is that Republicans are trying to frame student loan debt forgiveness as a handout to the, quote, elite few. 90% of the benefits are going to borrowers making under $75,000 a year. 90%. Compare that to the only major piece of legislation that Republicans passed when they controlled government, a tax cut that overwhelmingly benefited millionaires and billionaires. But sure, it's the folks making under $75K who are the real elites here. Got it. And here's what rubs me in the worst way. Republicans are trying to frame this as some huge injustice, and in doing so, they're effectively defending loan sharks. Oftentimes, the interest rates are so high, so predatory, that many people have already completely paid off the principal amount, and yet they're still left with a loan that's even higher than when they first took it out. This isn't about walking into a restaurant and refusing to pay your bill at the checkout. This is about trying to get by and paying your loan amount every month, and yet somehow still plunging deeper and deeper into inescapable debt. And the fact that Republicans are trying to conflate the two is as clear proof as you'll ever need that those people don't care about working people. They care about special interests and the ultra-rich who do not need to worry about student loan debt. My take on this is that if my tax dollars could go toward helping regular people who just need a break, then by all means, let's help them. For once, let's give a hand to regular people who are trying to get by instead of watching billion-dollar corporations get our money, instead of watching the military-industrial complex get our money, instead of watching the ultra-rich get tax cuts. We never hear a word of pushback when the top 1% get a handout. No one on the right ever decries socialism then. But God forbid a teacher, a truck driver, a cashier, a cook, a small business owner, a nurse gets a little bit of help. Notice how people making millions of dollars a year always try to convince those making $100,000 a year that those making $30,000 a year are the real problem. And even if that argument isn't resonant with you, even if your position is that you don't want to pay for someone else, consider this. Biden's student loan debt forgiveness plan is intended to benefit 43 million borrowers. About 20 million of those borrowers will have their loans completely eliminated. What do you think happens to the economy when you suddenly make it accessible to 43 million more people? What do you think happens to small businesses, to restaurants, to travel destinations, to clothing stores, to movie theaters? What do you think happens when people can inject money into goods and services instead of pumping it into predatory loan shark companies? And when businesses thrive, what do you think happens to the stock market? What do you think happens to your 401k? Allowing people to participate in the economy helps all of us. This is the prime example of how a rising tide lifts all ships. And yet, despite all of those arguments, both that we should allow people to have some dignity and not punish them for seeking an education, and that opening the economy up to tens of millions of people will help all of us, still Republicans are doing everything they can to block that progress. Republicans have gone to court to prevent the forgiveness from going through, an effort that was blocked not once, but twice. In one case, a U.S. District Court judge appointed by George W. Bush concluded that 6 Republican-led states lacked standing to bring the lawsuit to stop Biden from forgiving student loan debt. And in a separate case, Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, a Trump appointee, denied a request from conservative group Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty to pause the program. And just think about this for a moment. These are conservative politicians and operatives suing to prevent people from having their loan debt forgiven. This will have zero impact on their lives. They just don't want struggling people to get a break. That's all. This is the conservative movement in a nutshell. Make sure that the less fortunate never get a break, even if it has zero impact on your own life. The fact is that we've been here before. We constantly sit back and watch as Republicans use the same fake populism to glide their way into power, only then to protect not those regular people, but the special interests screwing those people over. And the only thing worse than their continuation of that is their own voters' inability to recognize it. In the fight against predatory loan sharks and the tens of millions of Americans whose lives are being ruined by them, if you're defending the loan sharks, then no matter how much you rail against the elites on Twitter and on Fox News, you're not actually working on behalf of the American people. So if you refuse to show up to vote today, then you're helping the people who wake up every day looking to ensure that the only people who thrive in this country are the ultra-rich. Those people are showing up. Those people are turning out. Let's make sure that we drown out their votes, because I can promise you that there are more of us than there are of them. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can click the thumbnail right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work even further, the best way is to subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Marjorie Taylor Cohen. There you can check out my interviews with major players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, Jamie Raskin, and so many more. Plus other interviews that live exclusively on the podcast. That link is also right here on this screen, or just search No Lie with Marjorie Taylor Cohen wherever you listen to podcasts.